This is still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. Today, we tell the story of a young man who walked out of his family's home one ordinary morning in Omaha and simply vanished. His name was Jason Anthony Jolkowski, and in the more than 2 decades since June 13, 2001, no one has been able to say what happened to him. You can picture the scene. Suburban streets, trimmed lawns, a short walk to a familiar high school. He carried a red restaurant shirt folded in his hands. He was supposed to meet a coworker for a ride to work. He never made it to the school. And in that narrow window of time, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes, he disappeared. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Aaron Klein. Aaron is a criminologist and victimology researcher based in Omaha. He has worked with families and advocacy groups on long-term missing person cases. Aaron, welcome to Still Answered.
Thanks, Maya. It's an honor to be here and to talk about Jason's case with the care it deserves.
By the way, before we go further, 2 important notes. 1, we will avoid naming uncharged people or indulging in wild speculation. 2, if you have any information about Jason, anything that might help, I'll leave the official numbers for the Omaha police at the end of this episode. Okay, are you ready?
I am. Let's dig in.
So, we start where the story starts. June 13, 2001. A Wednesday morning in the Benson neighborhood of Omaha. Jason was 19 years old. He lived with his parents, Jim and Kelly, and his younger brother, Michael. He was quiet, shy, described by those who knew him as gentle and responsible. He loved radio. He was studying broadcasting at Iowa Western Community College and dreamed of becoming a DJ. He worked at Fazoli's. He had his car in the shop. He had about $650 in a bank account that would remain untouched after he vanished. That morning, while getting ready for work, Jason got a call. Fazoli's needed him to come in early. His coworker offered to pick him up, suggesting they meet at Benson High School, a place Jason knew well. It was an easy meeting point. He left the house carrying his red Fazoli's shirt. He helped his brother bring in the trash cans. A neighbor saw him doing that. This neighbor's recollection is one of the small, important anchors in the timeline. And then he walked the 7 or 8 blocks toward the school. The walk should have taken, what, Aaron, 10 to 15 minutes?
Right. 10 to 15 minutes on foot, depending on pace and whether he stopped. We're talking, essentially, a quarter of an hour in broad daylight on quiet, residential streets.
Yet, sometime around 10:45 a.m., after those trash cans and the neighbor's sighting, Jason was gone. His coworker waited at the school. He never arrived. The school's security cameras, checked afterward, showed no sign of him. No bank withdrawals, no phone activity. His car, still at the shop. His paychecks, not picked up. The $650 in the bank, untouched. When you step back from the details, when you really look at the geography and the time, it's one of those cases that feels impossible. 8 blocks, daylight, a young man who loved his family, who left no notes and had no history of running. He vanished. No one screamed, no one called, no trace.
And Maya, that no trace aspect is what often haunts investigators. With missing person cases, evidence can be slim, but usually there's something, a witness, a stray piece of clothing, something on surveillance. In Jason's case, the investigative trail, at least in public records, goes cold very quickly.
Let's talk about Jason as a person for a few minutes, because we have to keep him central. He was born June 24, 1981, in Grand Island, Nebraska. At the time he disappeared, he was 19. Known to friends and family as JJ, he was tall, about 6 feet to 6'1", thin, dark hair, glasses. He had a speech and language learning disability. He'd had some special education support in school, but he was managing college and work. His faith mattered to him. His parents remember him as respectful and non-confrontational, someone with a small circle of friends, not a risk-taker. It's important we stay with those facts because they make certain explanations less likely.
Exactly. People sometimes default to he ran away or he was leading a secret life. But when you look at the facts, especially the untouched money, the uncollected paychecks, his car in the shop, those running theories lose weight. They don't fit the profile.
His family, from the moment he was missing, were thrown into something they had no language for. Ambiguous loss is a phrase clinicians use. You don't have a death to grieve. You don't have closure. You're stuck in between. That limbo is a particular kind of cruelty. Let's move through the timeline of that morning in a bit more detail, because the narrowness of the window matters. I'm going to walk listeners block by block, minute by minute, as best as we can reconstruct it. Jason helped his brother bring in trash cans. Neighbor sees him. Then he leaves, red shirt in hand. If he left around 10:45, he should have reached Benson High, 7 or 8 blocks away, by about 11 or so. His coworker arrives, waits 15 to 30 minutes, and then calls the house when Jason never shows. That call is what first alarms the family and leads to the realization that something is wrong.
And within that 15 to 30-minute window, everything happened. If there's an abduction, it had to be rapid. If an accident, it had to be sudden. If an acquaintance intervened, it had to happen quickly and discreetly. Whatever occurred, it left almost no evidentiary footprint in the immediate area.
The family, and then law enforcement, knocked on doors. Neighbors were interviewed. People searched yards and alleys. The school's security footage was reviewed. No sign of Jason on it. Police checked his bank account and phone activity. Nothing. They questioned coworkers, friends, and people with histories of violence in the area. But publicly, no one has been named as a suspect, and there were no publicly disclosed solid leads. Aaron, I know you'll unpack investigative details in a bit, but I want to pause and talk about the earliest police response because it matters to the arc of the case.
It does. In 2001, and in some places still today, law enforcement commonly considered older teens and young adults as potential runaways. That assumption can, frankly, shape how aggressively a case is pursued at the outset. In Jason's case, reports indicate that early assumptions that he might have left voluntarily slowed immediate, concentrated investigative measures. Some interviews and ground searches reportedly started in earnest about 10 days after he disappeared. That's a long time when we're talking about a narrow daylight window.
10 days. That delay is the kind of thing that families who survive these tragedies often point to. If only they'd taken it more seriously right away. Those early hours and days are critical.
They are. Forensic opportunities, canvas memory windows, and potential witnesses' recollections are strongest in the immediate aftermath. Delays can degrade those leads. That doesn't mean the early investigators were negligent. Many cases were handled based on the norms and resources at the time. But it does highlight systemic gaps that later led to reforms, including Jason's Law.
We'll get to Jason's Law and Project Jason in a moment. But first, I want to talk about some of the primary theories people consider in this case. We're going to treat each one carefully, what supports it, what doesn't, and why nothing has been proven. Theory 1, voluntary disappearance. Some early investigators apparently considered it. The points in favor: he was 19, legally an adult, and adults can choose to leave. But, Aaron, the evidence argues against it, right?
Yes, the case against voluntary disappearance is strong. First, the untouched bank account, uncollected paychecks, and the car in the repair shop all suggest he wasn't planning to vanish. Second, his personality, cling to family, shy, not impulsive, doesn't support a sudden decision to start a new life. Third, there's no digital or paper trail. Even in 2001, adults leaving town to start fresh often use some traceable resources. Finally, his family reports no significant conflict, crisis, or indication that he'd wanted to leave.
So, voluntary disappearance is considered unlikely by those who knew him, but we can't entirely rule it out on principle. We just weigh it.
Right. Unlikely, but always part of the open set of possibilities in an unsolved disappearance.
Theory 2, stranger abduction. It's the nightmare scenario. Some opportunistic stranger pulls up, quick, force-clean abduction, no trace. What supports that theory here?
What supports it is precisely the factual void. A brief, efficient vehicle-based abduction could, in theory, leave little trace in a residential area. If someone pulled up in a car, put him in the vehicle, and drove off within minutes, a casual neighbor might miss it or remember it later as something insignificant. Stranger abductions of this type are rare, but they do happen, and they can be rapid.
And what works against it?
Several things. Stranger abductions often generate at least one witness report, someone noticing a strange car or hearing a disturbance. There's also usually some physical trace, tire marks, broken glasses, a scuffle. Here, despite canvases and searches, no such public evidence surfaced. Also, stranger abductions that turn up later often have leads like composite descriptions or vehicle sightings. None of that emerged publicly in Jason's case.
Okay. Theory 3, acquaintance abduction. Someone he knew. An offer of a ride, a friendly interaction that turned sinister.
This is a plausible scenario. Given Jason's position, car and repair, coworker offering a ride, he might reasonably accept an offer from someone familiar. Many missing person cases eventually reveal that the person was last with someone they knew. The challenge here is that investigators reportedly followed up with coworkers, friends, even people with histories in the area, and publicly, nothing definitive came of those interviews.
So that remains a possibility, but with no public evidence pointing at any specific acquaintance. Okay, another theory: accident, hit and run, or sudden medical emergency. Thoughts?
Both forms of accident are logically possible. A hit and run could occur with a driver panicking and removing a body, but again, we'd expect some physical trace: damage to the vehicle, blood, a splash on pavement, something. A sudden medical event, like a collapse in a secluded spot, could lead to someone being incapacitated and later moved. But searches of the immediate route didn't locate a body or clear signs of such an event. So these theories are possible, but not strongly supported by available public evidence.
And then there's the trafficking or long-distance abduction theory. Someone takes him away to other networks or across state lines.
That's more speculative. While trafficking is a real and horrific industry, linking it to this particular disappearance requires evidence of transport, patterns, or related victims. In Jason's case, no such links have been publicly identified. It remains a possibility in the abstract. People are abducted and moved long distances. But without corroborating evidence, it's hard to give it explanatory weight.
Finally, the idea some people mention in hushed tones: a perfect crime, someone who planned an abduction that left no trace. It's chilling, but we've got to be careful. It's tempting to reach for the dramatic, but we don't want to invent a myth where facts are missing.
Exactly. Cases that seem to vanish into thin air can be the result of a combination of quick action by a perpetrator and lost opportunities, delayed searches, the inherent limits of witnesses' memories, or simply bad luck. It's unsettling, but it's not necessarily evidence of a perfectly executed plan. We have to balance the terror of that idea with methodical analysis.
For listeners trying to follow evidence versus speculation, the public record is sparse, which is why family advocacy became such an important part of this story. About 2 years after Jason vanished, his parents, Jim and Kelly, created Project Jason. Project Jason is a nonprofit to help families of the missing. It grew out of their experience: the flyer making, the media calls, the confusion about what to do. It helped other families with posters, guidance, emotional support, and connecting with resources. There's a through line here. From a personal tragedy came institutional change.
And that change extended to state policy. Jason's Law passed in Nebraska in 2005. Its aim was to create a statewide missing persons clearinghouse to standardize data collection, improve reporting, and ensure that missing people, regardless of age, are entered and tracked appropriately. That law is a concrete legacy of Jason's disappearance, a reform intended to close precisely the sort of gaps that may have hampered early response in his case.
The law is meaningful, but it is also a reminder. Legal changes can help future cases, but they can't bring back someone who vanished without explanation. Jason's parents have lived 2 decades with a hole where a son should be. They've had to navigate ambiguous loss and keep public attention alive out of a mix of hope and necessity. Aaron, tell listeners what the passing of Jason's Law signals about how cases are categorized and why age matters in initial response.
It signals recognition of a systemic bias. Historically, missing child cases, preteen, young children, get prioritized as potential abductions. Older teens and adults were more likely to be viewed through a runaway lens. Jason's Law tried to remove that wonky threshold by creating systems that don't rely on assumptions about age or autonomy. It standardized entries into databases like NCIC, encouraged rapid information sharing, and hoped to make initial responses more uniform and less dependent on individual judgments.
That's the policy side. But there's the human side, too. Project Jason has helped many families, handing them tools that Jason's parents wished they'd had. They turned their grief into a form of activism. Sometimes I think it's important to say, plainly, that despite all the advocacy, despite the law, Jason himself remains missing. That is the point that keeps pulling us back. The person at the center of this is someone who loved radio, who worked at a restaurant, who lived with his parents, who had friends. And we go on and on about laws and theories because the person is missing.
Well put. And that human focus also shapes how we evaluate and present theories. Ethical storytelling is not about sensationalism. It's about staying anchored to the person's life and the facts we have, then clearly labeling hypotheses as hypotheses.
Listeners, let's walk through some of the finer investigative details: what officers did, what they checked, and where the trail cooled. Aaron, you mentioned earlier the issue of early delay. Beyond that, what were some of the central investigative steps and why they didn't lead to a resolution?
Officers did the standard: canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed neighbors, reviewed camera footage at Benson High School, checked bank and phone records, and interviewed family, friends, and coworkers. They looked into local sex offenders and persons with violent histories. They organized ground searches that covered yards and alleys along the route. Over time, leads were followed up on, but none bore the kind of corroborative evidence that results in charges. There are limits. Eyewitness memory fades, physical traces degrade, and if someone moved him quickly in a vehicle, the local scene might not reveal evidence. Also, very practical, the capacity and resources allocated to the case influence the intensity of follow-up.
Which brings up something painful but real: resources and prioritization. A case like Jason's can languish if it lacks the sort of high-profile attention that galvanizes additional assets, which is one reason Project Jason and the family's outreach mattered. They kept pressure and attention on the case. I want to pause for a second and read something Kelly, Jason's mother, said in an interview years after his disappearance. She said, "You don't know how to live with it. You learn to go on." It's a small sentence, but it carries everything: the weariness, the refusal to give up, and the daily routine of hope and fear.
That quote captures the ethical center of this episode. Families live with a living, ongoing question. That state of uncertainty has documented mental health effects: depression, anxiety, complicated grief. Agencies that assist families, like Project Jason, fill gaps that no one else is prepared for.
Okay, we've discussed plausible theories, investigative steps, the family's advocacy. Let's think about what could meaningfully change now. The case is decades old. Is there practical hope that new technology or new tips could revive the investigation?
Yes, there are a few avenues. One is renewed public attention. Someone who knows something might come forward once they realize their memory could be useful. Human memory is fallible, but sometimes people withhold details for years due to fear or shame and later step forward. Another is technology. Genetic genealogy has solved cold cases that once seemed impossible, although it requires biological evidence linked to the case. In Jason's disappearance, because there's no known physical evidence, no recovered DNA, those tools are harder to apply. But social media, age-progressed imagery, and coordinated canvas renewals can produce tips. Finally, cross-jurisdictional communication improvements help. If there were an unconnected report in another state, better data sharing makes that link more likely.
So, there are paths. Not guaranteed, but paths. That brings me to a question I often ask guests on this show. What would a small, concrete thing an ordinary listener could do right now to help Jason's case?
Share the case responsibly. If you live in or near Omaha, check through old memories. Did you see anything odd around Benson on June 13, 2001? Sometimes an old neighbor, an out-of-town friend, or someone who used to drive that route remembers a car or a brief encounter. Second, if you have information, call the Omaha police. If you want to support families more broadly, look into missing person advocacy groups like Project Jason. They provide resources and help families navigate the system. Finally, donate time or funds to local cold case units if you want to help investigative capacity.
I'll read the contact information at the end of the episode, but I want to go back to something you said earlier about how cases like this changed policy. Jason's Law is a notable public policy response. Aaron, could you explain in lay terms what Jason's Law mandates and why it matters beyond Nebraska?
Sure. Jason's Law created a statewide clearinghouse and standardized reporting for missing persons in Nebraska. That means that when a person is reported missing, the information is entered into a central system quickly and shared across agencies. It reduces inconsistency, so a local officer can't decide "not urgent" and let the case sit without documentation. The law helps ensure missing adults are given a consistent level of attention and tracking, not treated differently simply because they're over 18. Other states have adopted similar reforms. The broader lesson is that policy can codify best practices and prevent initial assumptions from constraining investigations.
That's helpful. And it's also a bittersweet achievement. It's both a legacy and a reminder of what was lost. We're more than halfway through this episode. I want to take a moment to circle back to the most uncomfortable part, what we still don't know, and to be deliberate about the language we use. We have no proof for any theory. We have reasonable assessments. We have institutional reforms. We have a family that built a movement out of grief. But what we don't have is Jason. He remains probable missing, suspected of foul play. And for that, we still ask, who did this? Or was it simply a tragic accident? Those are the questions investigators still try to answer.
Maya, there's also a broader point here for listeners who follow true crime stories. Unresolved cases like this show us how important process is. Evidence collection, rapid canvassing, family liaison work, the little routine practices of good policing matter. So do the social resources families need in the aftermath. Cases don't exist in a vacuum. They're embedded in systems that either help or hinder resolution.
And there's the emotional labor of advocacy. Jim and Kelly had to not only grieve, but also become spokespeople, organizers, and, frankly, investigators in their own right. Project Jason has helped countless families, but that work is a reminder of how much burden is placed on private citizens when systems fall short. Okay, let's do something a bit different now. Aaron, can you walk us through, in plain language, how a modern investigator would reopen a case like Jason's today? What steps would they take that might differ from 2001?
Sure. Step 1 would be a case file review. A cold case team systematically re-examines the original file, looking for misfiled items, missed leads, or modern forensic opportunities. Step 2 is witness recontacting. Memories change, but sometimes people who were reluctant to speak earlier will talk now. Step 3 is rechecking databases, vehicle registrations, phone records that might now be digitized, and cross-referencing with other missing person reports. Step 4 would be technological. If any physical evidence exists, labs might be able to extract DNA now where they couldn't previously. Step 5 is public outreach. Age-progressed images, local media refreshes, and targeted social media campaigns. Finally, multi-jurisdictional checks are more efficient now. Information sharing has improved since 2001, making it easier to spot links across state lines.
That gives some cautious hope. But crucially, it depends on there being something, some thread that can be tugged. Without physical evidence, it's often about eliciting memories or a late tip.
Exactly.
Before we close, I want to create a space to consider the ethical responsibilities of storytellers, especially us, the podcast hosts. Families of missing people often watch and listen. How should we handle intriguing gaps without turning them into fodder?
We should do what you're doing, Maya. Center the person, avoid naming suspects without evidence, separate speculation from fact, and offer resources. Tell the story with compassion and be transparent about uncertainty. It's okay to discuss theories, just make it clear they're hypothetical. and follow the lead of families where appropriate. Many prefer a responsible, dignified portrayal.
We also owe it to listeners to say, if you hear something years later, or if you have a memory you thought irrelevant, it could matter. Small details accumulate into civilization-changing evidence sometimes, like the make of a car, a ribbon of color, a partial license plate, a distinctive sound. All right, we're nearing the end. Aaron, do you have one last reflective thought about Jason's case to share with listeners?
Yes. Cases like Jason's are painful precisely because they resist narrative closure. But they're also powerful because they can spur change policy, advocacy, community support. The most important thing we can do is keep a respectful, steady focus on the missing person, on the family, and on the work that might still yield answers. People who come forward sometimes do so because they hear a voice that treats their memory with dignity.
I want to close, as I often do, by recentering Jason as a person. He wasn't only a case number. He was Jason Anthony Jolkowski, born June 24, 1981, who loved radio, who liked the idea of being on the air, who helped his brother with trash cans that morning and carried his red work shirt in his hands. He had hopes. He had a future that was interrupted. And his parents, Jim and Kelly, never stopped doing the work they thought might find him. If you have any information, no matter how small, please call the Omaha Police Department, 402-444-5818 or 402-444-5657. You can also reach Crime Stoppers in Omaha at 402-444-STOP and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. Again, these numbers are for tips, for memories you've held, for things that no longer feel small. If you're listening and this episode stirred something heavy, anxiety, anger, grief, please consider reaching out to a support resource in your community. Families living with ambiguous loss need long-term support. Advocacy groups like Project Jason can be a starting point. Aaron, thank you for being here. Your measured, humane perspective makes this hard material easier to hold.
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate the care you and your team bring to these stories.
And to our listeners, thank you for listening. We'll keep Jason's story alive on this show, not for sensationalism, but because unanswered cases deserve attention, and because each story is a person worth remembering. This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. If you have a tip about Jason, call the numbers I mentioned. If you want to support missing persons' families, look up Project Jason and other local resources. We'll be back with another unresolved story next week.
Good night.